Yeah. So we've been talking. So first, let me say, my name is Suzette Chang, founder and CEO of Thick Descriptions, and I have the pleasure of talking with Miss Angela Monson. And you just said that this is your first podcast.
It is, and I'm so excited because I couldn't think of a better host than you.
Aw, you are very
To
kind.
start. I'm excited. You know, you listen, you watch, but
Right.
I've never been a participant in. So
So
I'm learning.
but I know you've interviewed people. I know you've
I've
interviewed.
done lots of interviews.
Yes, and
this
you've been
feels much like, and
interviewed.
I've been interviewed. I've
Yeah.
done interviews.
Yeah.
But podcasts technically are kind of new inventions. So I'm excited.
And so think of it this way. It's no different than what you've done for however long you've done it. It's just a different technology.
So when I walked into the room, that's right, I said, oh, this looks much like many rooms I've been in
Yes.
for interviews.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
both state and local and
Yes.
even on national level.
Yes.
So it's fun.
Yes.
It's really fun. I'm having a great time.
And we were also talking about before we started recording how technology has pivoted and shifted in so many ways, and how all of us, it's either get on board or get left behind.
Or get left behind. You know, I look at my kids. I have 3 grandbabies, and the youngest is 9 years old. I mean, these kids can maneuver phones.
Yeah.
They can maneuver new TV technology.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They know how. It's almost like, and some people would argue, yes, there have been some genetic changes. It's
Yeah.
almost like in the DNA now.
Right.
It's the way the brain works.
That's
it's the way
correct.
they consume information. And as we talk more, I think those of us who are involved in social policy and social change have to understand that people do consume information differently.
Correct.
And we too have to change.
Correct.
What my 29-year-old daughter does
Correct.
is so different from what I do, and
Correct.
it's so different from my 9-year-old daughter.
Correct.
You know, I like emojis.
Right.
My kid says, why do you keep using these emojis? I said, because that's what I learned to use.
And see, I'm careful with emojis because some of those are loaded in meaning, and I just don't touch it. I either do a like or a love, and I'm good.
Well, I just do a lot of smiley faces
Okay.
and,
Okay.
lightweight stuff.
Okay.
And because I have this app that tells me what they mean.
Okay.
But
Oh, okay.
it's kind of hard because I know there's so many of them.
Yes, there are.
And, GIFs, is that how you say them?
GIFs.
GIFs. See, I don't even know how to pronounce it. I can't figure that out. And for people who can go find things and embed them in messages and
Right.
stuff, it's like, whoa, they're really good.
And so as you're talking, I'm listening to you, and I'm also being reflective because I grew up when encyclopedias were the way to get information.
So did
and
I.
books. And,
So did
and
I.
it's not that those things don't exist anymore, but most, if not all of it, is available online.
I explained an encyclopedia to my 11-year-old grandson, and he was like, really, Grammy?
Yes.
I said that was all we had. But
Yes.
keep in mind, when I went into the legislature, 1990, laptops didn't exist.
Correct.
Computers existed, laptops didn't exist.
Correct.
So.
So, perfect segue. Tell us a little bit about your legislative experiences. I know it's plural.
Well, and thank you for that, because it is plural. It's a lot. My first experience with the legislature, really inside the entity, was as a staff person. And a lot of people don't realize that or know that. I started in 1980-81
Okay.
as a numbers cruncher, a fiscal analyst. I staffed a special joint committee on federal funds. And it was really weird. It was just created by then the Democrat-controlled legislature.
Okay.
And it was as a result of a lot of federal budget cuts to states. I mean, huge federal cuts in funding. So this special joint committee was created to really ascertain what the implications were for Oklahoma. So I came into this job after working as a traveling city manager for a period of time. The running joke at my job is, how many jobs have you had? What job have you not had? And
It's probably a better approach, right?
We can talk about that too if you have time, because it's been a lot. But I came into this role working for the appropriations chairs, plural, both in the House and the Senate, because it was a joint committee.
Okay.
So it was my opportunity to learn about the process, the legislative process, and particularly with the appropriations committees, that's when you learn a lot about state government and how it works and operates. And it's the relationship between agencies, the legislature, the governor's office. So although I came with some experience and background in government and some degrees that helped me work in government, this was a real eye-opening experience to learn. So it was from that work, not because of that work, but in that work, I decided to run for office the first time in 1984. And I lost that race. I lost that race by 132 votes. It was very close. And I ran
what
again,
position was it?
state representative. It was a state representative seat. I ran again in 88, was too broke to run in 86. I ran again in 88 and lost the race. And finally, I won that seat in 1990. And what I tell people always...
I admire your tenacity.
Well, because by that time, in 84 when I ran, I knew the importance of that role, that position. And being, as a House member, one of 101 was still not like you can run the ship, but you had a voice.
Correct.
And what you said and the issues you brought to the table and how you operated within that body could make a huge difference, not just for the people you represented, but for all of the people in the state of Oklahoma. And I had been a change maker. I had worked community issues and in my community since I was 14 years old.
Got it.
So working for change and trying to make things better for people who typically didn't have a voice, who didn't even understand the process, who didn't even know anything about change and how to make things better for themselves was so important to me. So this bid for office, I had never planned on running for office. It was not, how people say, when I grow up, I'm going to be. That was not even anywhere near my list, let alone on the list.
What was the top three?
Being a comedian.
Really?
Being a stand-up comic. That was at the top of the list till I was really old.
You got jokes.
I entertained my family, and my brother used to always laugh and say, now you get a chance to do it in the legislature for real. But being a musician, I wanted to be a band teacher. I wanted to be a studio musician. Was always on the list, and I went to college to be a music major. And then at one point, being a journalist was on the list, kind of in and out. And that was interesting. So anyway, being in the legislature was not on the list, but
being involved in community.
Being involved in community, being a change agent, being an activist was always on the list. So it was not, I don't think, unusual for me to say, this is something I got to do. I had to do. It was almost like a calling. It was a ministry, really, for me. But I will say, I was a much better legislator in 1990 when I was elected than I would have been in 84. Those 6 years, at a time when I worked hardcore health policy issues, helped manage and run and establish coalitions, very large coalitions of organizations. It just made me better for it.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything. And it was like the Lord said, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, now.
I get it.
Now.
I get it.
And I was willing to accept the now. So I spent 15 years in the legislature, 3 in the House, 12 as a state senator. I chaired the Senate Finance Committee, which was the committee that really does tax policy. I learned a lot about taxes. I had the good fortune of leading a national organization. You can blame us for having to pay taxes on the things you buy online because there were some federal rules and some Supreme Court rulings that required certain things to happen before we could do that. And it was a big loss. We knew that ultimately it was going to be a big loss of revenue for cities and towns, for states who had sales tax. So I got a chance to do that. I got a chance to be involved nationally with the National Conference of State Legislatures as their health committee chair at a time when states had sued tobacco companies. And helped negotiate that settlement that brought money into the state. And then I got a chance to be the National Conference of State Legislatures president. Not a big deal to anybody except legislators, but it was a big deal. It gave me a chance to see the world, work in other countries in terms of how you make policy, how you make change, how you engage people.
Because it's very different.
It's different. I learned a lot, and perspectives changed. I just wish people could really get out of Oklahoma
for a while,
and see
right?
the world
Agreed.
and see other places. And
Agreed.
when you see what happens around the world, you realize how much we have in common, but how different things really are and how different things can be. So,
and just to piggyback on that, I know we were talking earlier about technology and the internet, and those two platforms allow us to see. It doesn't provide context.
that's absolutely right.
And so it's one thing, like, for example, the hurricanes that are happening.
Right.
You can see it. You can see the devastation. You can see all that is happening. But it's another thing to be face to face with that mother that just lost their child.
Absolutely right. And, to be face to face with a person in another country that we think is bad, and you realize they just want what we want.
Exactly.
People
They're human
just
beings.
want what we want.
They're just human beings, exactly.
And now that I'm much older, fast forward a whole lot of years since I left the legislature in 2005, I really, really understand even more so how fundamentally important it is for us to impact governments, our government, whether it's state or our national government. But, these issues we're seeing around the world now, which are scary to me, and we have this ongoing discussion about will there be a World War III? And I just keep saying we're right there, guys.
Right.
But it's scary because it's not the people in these countries. They're not our enemies. What's happening, I don't want to get too political, but what's happening to the Palestinian people, which has been happening for decades and decades and decades.
It's just getting a lot of media attention right now.
Right.
Correct.
We should recognize it. And, what's happening with the Israeli government, I don't have to say it's right. I don't have to be in opposition to Jewish people at all, because even Jewish people want the war to stop. So when we can humanize some of these things that are happening, whether it's international or whether it's right in our own communities, maybe we can find some places that we agree in. We can make some things happen.
And Thick Descriptions, as practicing anthropologists, we get that.
That's right.
We get that. At the beginning and end of the day, we're all human beings.
That's right.
Our experiences are different due to a variety of systems that have been created to benefit some and not benefit others. Get that. The basic
right.
101 is you're a human, I'm a human. Right.
That's right. And we all want to eat.
Yes.
And we all want to enjoy our children.
Yes.
And we all want to have some reasonable quality of life, health
Yes.
and well-being and mental
Yes.
health. That's what we really want as humans. It's, this whole notion of I'm better and you're less than.
Right. Class and caste, right?
That's right. It was created by
Correct.
some who wanted to have power. And my favorite quote by one of my favorite abolitionists and activists, Frederick Douglass, is power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did. It never will. And the speech within which he made those comments is a great speech. I kind of read it probably more regularly than I should, but it's about change, and it's about a rebalance of power. And that's what change is. And when I said to you, let's be philosophical about talking about change, that's why change is hard. People who have power don't want to give it up.
Right.
They're not going to readily give it up.
Right. So I've said this several times, having the privilege and pleasure of going throughout the state of Oklahoma, engaging folks to think critically. And so one of the conversations we've had is, as people that have historically been without power are gaining power, those that have historically had power are now afraid.
That's right. And they're going to hunker down to
Right.
keep that power.
Because the assumption is that what me and or my forefathers did to you and or your forefathers, you are now going to do to me and future generations. And so, and that's the core of it, of, as, for example, me as an African-American female, grateful for the privileges and the powers that I have obtained. And I know it comes with a responsibility. It comes with a responsibility of helping those that have historically been in power to trust me.
That's right. not
that
to do
I'm
to
not
them
what they
did.
and their ancestors
But
did
that's
to
what they know.
Correct.
And that's how they feel, and that's how they think.
Correct.
And that makes, we talked about, my whole real fast through my legislative experiences, and then, for 15 years or so, I was at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, still trying to change people's lives in a different way. But now at Oklahoma Policy Institute, where I work now, I'm back to where my heart is, how you change systems, how you change policy that for us, that really impact everyday Oklahomans' lives for the better. And this whole notion of I got to maintain power, we're confronted with every day. And I'm going to tell you, you can see it in big systems. So I'm going to take off my OK policy hat for a minute for anybody who's listening or watching, but voters, and talk about voter suppression. Because democracy and the representative democracy within which we live was created as a system to give people voice and really have systems of government and systems created that represent the majority and that do good things for the majority.
Right.
Well, we know that doesn't exist.
Correct.
But as the majority changes in this country, that's that change you were talking about.
Right.
As it looks different, as it could behave differently. That what now is coming to be the minority of folk who are nervous about this are trying to figure out ways to keep the power. And suppressing vote, given this is a representative democracy, is one of the easiest ways to do it. Not here in Oklahoma as much as other states, the redistricting process that will keep the majority of state legislatures, that majority party, and it's done with the pen, with the pencil, with the drawing of the lines,
redlining,
making sure that maybe ultimately to register to vote, you got to prove that you're a U.S. citizen, not just attest to that. I mean, I think about 18-year-olds who might have to get a birth certificate. I mean, in Oklahoma, getting a birth certificate is not that easy, and you have to pay for it. It's not a free deal.
Born in California, I get it. Yes,
so
it is challenging getting my birth certificate.
Fast forward, a new version of poll taxes, and it's hard. As NCSL president, I was on a national panel with the then Arizona Speaker of the House. And we were talking about voting, balloting. And this is, we're talking about 20 plus years ago, almost 30, 20 years ago. And he made the comment that he thought we made it too easy for people to vote in this country. And we should make sure that voters are informed, like ask them things like, who's their congressional representative? Or ask them things he was saying like, who's the lieutenant governor? If I went out now in the community and say, who's the lieutenant governor?
Most would not know.
Most people wouldn't know that. So, and he was saying these things, and all I was having flashbacks of poll taxes and stuff. And he was the last speaker, right? So I couldn't let it end like that. So I said, and I also think maybe you believe that we should ask people how many grains there are on this beach at an ocean, or maybe how many bubbles there are in a bar of soap, which were literal poll questions asked to keep us from voting at one time. So this transition back to things that suppress people in a way that allows people with power keep the power is real, and people need to recognize how real that is.
Agreed. And so you said a couple of things that I definitely want to piggyback on. In addition, the issue of trust. That is a word that is loaded in meaning. I come from a generation, and I think previous generations as well, where trust, it was just blanketed. If I trust you to watch my kid, if I trust you to, you borrow money for me, you're going to pay it back, then there's this full blanket of trust. Where now in the 21st century, there's layers of trust. And it is encouraged to be earned over time, hence building relationships. Two, you talked about earlier about community. So for most melanated people, we were born and raised in community. If I have, you have. If you have, I have. There is no big I and little you.
That's right.
We all come up together.
That's right.
And so that's another word that is thrown around it's
Loosely.
loaded. Yes. And so and I would go even further, even for most African American women, that definition, that's our core. If little Johnny down the street needs some food, and mama and daddy are working, come on, little Johnny, come to the house. So if that's what we're doing in our neighborhoods, when we expand that geographic community outside of our neighborhoods, it means the same.
It means the same, but it's harder to actualize.
Agreed. And so explaining those experiences to those historically who have been in power and don't define community the way we do. It becomes a whole nother relationship building, because then you understand, well, I can't impose my understanding of community on you, and I'm not going to let you impose yours on me. So where's the middle line? Where's the middle? Where can we compromise? And I know for me personally and professionally, it's finding spaces to create those opportunities.
That's absolutely right.
Because more often than not so much in the last couple of years since the height of the pandemic, but definitely before the height of the pandemic, many people, I could go to different places throughout the state of Oklahoma, specifically rural areas, as soon as they saw me, a whole nother vibe was going on. Now, it wasn't to the extreme of severe segregation and lynching, but it felt like it.
It felt different, huh?
You could feel the vibe shift. And it was like, and I've literally taken a few board members who don't look like you and I and say, hey,
come with me.
Come with me, and I might need you to speak on behalf of, because I need them to hear the message, not focus on the messenger.
So community in our day, and my day was before your day, was real geographical. It was cultural, it was geographical, because we lived in Black communities. I didn't go to school with white kids till my senior year in high school.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have my first white teacher till my senior year in high school.
Oh, wow.
So you're absolutely right. There were families in my community that had more resources than others, but it was always this sense of we are the same, because I think our parents had these shared experiences that they built into their children. Now, I'm a 50s baby, so we can talk about it. We're talking about a long time ago. Now, Black folk live everywhere in Oklahoma City.
Correct.
We can just talk about Oklahoma City. So there's no more geographical community of people who look alike.
Correct.
Or who've even had shared past experiences or historical experiences.
Correct.
So building community is harder.
Yes.
And it is a whole lot different than it used to be.
Yes.
So, but I think it can still happen.
Agreed.
I think it can still happen, because of that humanness that we talked about earlier. But I'll give you an example of building community in one of those rural Oklahoma communities that's, and it's about finding that common ground, which is not as easily done as we talk about, because it takes some time and energy. So my first year as a House member, when I went to the legislature, I had a healthcare policy background. So healthcare, universal healthcare access for everybody was my main platform. And it was a main bill of mine. And it generated a whole lot more discussion than I thought. Almost got passed off of the House floor, which was surprising. It was a universal care bill that created a system that kind of looked like the Canadian system, kind of, sort of. So I was like shocked that we even got that far. But my colleagues, particularly from rural Oklahoma, understood how hard it was to access health care.
Right.
They understood it. So my seatmate said, well, come do a series of town halls with me. And I said, me? Look at me. And touch the face. I'm this Black woman. And you're talking about coming to rural Oklahoma, because he's in kind of kind of redneck rural Oklahoma. So he says, yeah, it'll be all right. So we planned these series of meetings in southeastern Oklahoma. So at the very first one, which was in his very, very small hometown that I don't think had any Black folk that lived there. So we go to the diner. That's where it was. And there were all these white men. There were no women there in the room. And so I got introduced. I stand up to start talking about health care. So it actually goes very well. So the story, is after the meeting's over, we're in the car going to the next place. So he says to me, when you first got up and started talking, I looked around the room. He said, I thought about what you said to me about you coming to my hometown. He said, I looked, and he said this out of his mouth. The biggest redneck in the room was there. And he said, I thought to myself, oh my, what have I done? I made a mistake, because he knew what these people thought. He was not a racist. He was not, and I shouldn't say that, because I'm not sure if he was or wasn't. He was embracing of the message for sure.
Right.
So he said, but after it was over, that guy who I thought was the biggest redneck in our town came to me, and he said to me, that's our kind of gal. Now, that's the word he used, but the fact of the matter was, this conversation about people's health and the inability to get health and your kids and the difficulties in the system resonated with that audience enough to overcome this big barrier.
Exactly.
So we were able to actually build, if I use the term again a little loosely, a community around that issue.
Right.
And it was from there, you talked about trust.
Right.
It was from that conversation we began to build this notion of trust in relationship. Because building trust and building relationship is hard. My mom used to tell me that you always trust people until they prove themselves not trustworthy.
That blanket trust,
That blanket trust. Well, that worked for us then until
not
you
so
prove
much now.
Not so much now. And that's not how people think. That's not how kids think.
Right.
That's not how everybody is like, I'm not sure about you.
Right.
Hands, little arms distance before. So building relationship, finding those common issues, the things that, and that's what we do at OK Policy now still. We have people around the state. We have people who work on particular issues around the state, that we go into communities, and we don't even talk about politics.
Right.
I mean, we don't talk about legislative actions. We talk about, your life.
Right.
What's your experience?
Because everyone needs food. They need a roof over their head. They need clothes on their back. They need to take care of their health. And they need a education. Those are the basics.
So you talk to, it's like people in other countries. You talk about the things that people are concerned about, and you build that relationship, and you build that trust. Sometimes it happens fast. In some communities, it takes longer.
Right.
But that's kind of how we operate.
Right.
And once you can build that relationship, once you can build a little trust, then you can maybe get people to talk differently to their legislature. And then you teach them about this power dynamic. And then they're more receptive to teaching and learning new things that you can take and use to leverage the power, because people do have the power. And that's my message always. You do have power. But if you don't use it, you are powerless.
Agreed. And so Thick Descriptions is a huge advocate at Oklahoma Policy Institute. You all, even before you start, how long have you been with OPI?
Well, it's really weird. I've been in this position now 4 years.
Okay.
But my relationship with OPI started when OPI started.
Yeah.
And I've done some work. I did some contractual work.
Right.
And in fact, I took a 2-month contract to end a grant. That was like 4.5 years ago, and that was going to be the end of that.
Not.
But yeah, it's been good for them, I hope. Yeah. But it's been very good for me, this association.
And so, yes, and a reason I bring this up, because the data that you all provide, and want to, for our listeners, definitely check out the Oklahoma Policy Institute website. Pretty much any issue you want to have a better understanding about, the data, the statistics. In fact, about once a week, you all send me a newsletter
called In the Know.
In the Know, and it gives the number of the day.
Yes.
And I will post that on my Facebook. The number of the day is this, like the number of the how much you would need to make on an hourly basis to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Oklahoma.
That's absolutely right.
I mean, real basic stuff that most of us overlook for a variety of reasons, not understand. And housing is a big issue
That's
now in
absolutely
Oklahoma. I
So-
believe Oklahoma City ranks number 6 in evictions in the country.
I would be surprised if it's that high. I mean, that,
Right.
you know, we
Yeah,
could be number 1 or number 2.
yeah,
Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And housing is not just an Oklahoma issue, it's a national
Correct.
issue. But the Oklahoma law
Correct.
that allows people to get evicted.
Correct.
If you're day 1 after your rent is due.
Correct.
And what you have to do to try to stave off evictions is so
Correct.
complicated, and
Correct.
people don't have any idea that
Correct.
they have rights. Makes us, I mean, you go,
Correct.
one of our people went to eviction court the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just see it's like a meal.
Yes.
You know, and there are certain people who are responsible for the majority of evictions.
Right.
These are major national corporations that
Right.
own these apartments, and
Right.
it's like a puppy meal. I mean,
Right.
I guess I don't want to offend anybody
Right.
by using that analogy, but it's like churning people
Right.
out, get you out, so I
And
can
get somebody else in. Right.
and I can charge them more,
Right.
and then they don't pay, and so
And so being a native Californian, that's what I left 20
Yes.
plus years ago. So to see it here in Oklahoma, it's like, one, I've seen this movie before. Oh my gosh, it's in Oklahoma now.
Here it is.
Yes.
I was talking to one of our comms associates today about our listening sessions. We go out every summer and we talk to people in communities. We survey people in communities. And housing affordability
Right.
is still way at the top of the list. People
Correct.
know it because it's their life experiences.
Right.
So, but what they don't understand is, we could change this because it's the law
Right.
that's allowing a lot of this stuff to happen. Did you know that there was a law that preempts cities and towns from really getting down to the true nitty-gritty of who owns what property?
Yes.
I mean, you would think, just go to the county website.
No,
and you can
ma'am.
find through the assessors who owns what. It's a lot more complicated to that. So identifying who these bad actors are, these
Right.
corporate property owners,
Right.
is really difficult.
Right.
It really is
It
hard.
typically requires you to take off work, go downtown where the records are kept, engage with someone that may or may not want to. They'll give you the information, but you have steps. And so if you are someone that is struggling to keep a roof over your head, you don't have the time to
Of
take
course you
off
don't.
work.
You don't
and
have-
they're open Monday
That's
through
right.
Friday, 8 to 5.
5.
And so if, let's say you have a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 job, and then on Saturday and Sunday you're available. They're not.
They're not. And so going to eviction court,
Right.
you got a job
Right.
that's just barely allowing you to make ends meet.
Right.
And if you take off, you're subject to get fired.
Correct.
Then the next step is you don't show up
Correct.
in eviction court. There's a summary judgment.
There
and
it is.
you're evicted.
There it is.
And you're out
And
of
that
there.
is something else I've noticed in the last couple of years, more so since the height of COVID, the tent communities.
Yes.
Here in Oklahoma City, it looks like what I left in California.
California.
And again, initially it's been very triggering.
Right.
Because I was naive enough to think, I left California. It's not coming to Oklahoma. Basically, I just kicked the bucket.
So, and people think that people who are unhoused are folk who are mentally ill
No.
or drugs or whatever. No, we know that they got evicted.
Right.
And then they did some couch surfing, and
Right.
then this happened and
Right.
that happened. And lo and behold, they have no
Right.
place to live.
Right.
So this notion, but see, the legislators' response and some city councils' response to this is, we're just going to criminalize homelessness. We're going to say, if you set up a tent here, then you got to go to this fictional place that's going to help you.
So-
golly gee, guys, policymakers, those
Right.
places like that don't exist.
I remember, so prior to being an anthropologist, I was a librarian, a director of a library, and worked for a large library system here in Oklahoma. And I remember being in Midwest City at work, and there were unhoused people there. I know at the downtown library, there are a lot of unhoused people there as well. And they would purposely, and still do, use the library because it was a place.
a public
It's
place.
a public space, one. Two, you could usually get a meal if there's a program going
Right.
on. You've got free air conditioning, especially when the weather is too hot or too cold, or you have heat. You have free Wi-Fi.
That's what I say. Get to the internet.
You be able to get, and you have the public bathrooms. And I remember one guest specifically. He would purposely do something on a Friday so that they would arrest him, so he would have a place to stay
the weekend.
That's right. Even though the library was open on the weekends. And so those officers had developed that kind of relationship where they knew what he was doing. And sometimes they would accommodate him and sometimes they didn't. I bring that story up, and you and I could go on and on with different stories of it speaking to the systems that
right.
exist.
That's absolutely right.
And that's a reason that Thick Descriptions has a relationship with OPI, because we are pivoting to focus more on system disruption.
That's right. How do we make that change occur?
Right.
You talked about the arrest and OPI, and we have a great research team. I mean, I work with some of the smartest young people I think that exist in the world. But we were talking about a report and the ability now to take some information about arrest and evictions and the regular routine arrests that occur and make a correlation. So I know I'm not explaining it as well as our research team could be, but the bottom line is there are patterns now that we can document of people who routinely get arrested for little things,
Right.
so they'll have a place to stay in the relationship. So, I mean, OPI is really good. We were in a team meeting, a joint team meeting today, and one of our researchers just said, fun fact, and she talked about the cost of health care to the Healthcare Authority, our Medicaid agency, to the Department of Corrections and Relationships, that exists. But using this data and this information, first of all, to prove a point, and then to use it to try to get policymakers to think differently. We participated in a study with the Poor People's Campaign yesterday at the Capitol about poverty, reducing poverty. And one of the facts that, again, our director of research who presented, and it was I just found it astonishing that we think, oh, poor people are just all these adult folk who don't work.
No.
Well, adults who don't work and who are not actively looking for work represents 1.6% of the population in poverty in Oklahoma. Most of the poor people in Oklahoma are kids.
That's right.
And then when you take into account disabled people,
That's right.
caregivers of
Those
disabled
with
people,
mental-
seniors
That's
who are
right.
now not beyond work age.
Right. Right.
It's just that's who we're talking about who
Right.
live in poverty. So
Right.
trying to get legislators and other policymakers
Right.
to understand these are just not people who are living off the government tit as they
Right. think.
And then at the same time, at the same study, we talked about who is taking advantage of these public programs and how hard it is. You got to be really, really poor. Right. The federal poverty guidelines that most programs use to determine who's eligible for these programs don't represent the real definition in some census information of poverty, because they just pick a number, and it's the same in California as Oklahoma and everywhere else. But when you really look at what it costs to live, and we're not talking about buying a big screen TV or going to a movie, we're just talking about the basic necessities, and you take that number, and then you anybody who can't afford to do that is poor.
There it
they
is.
live in poverty.
And then you throw in generational poverty, and then that takes on a whole nother beast.
It's crazy. So thank you, Thick Descriptions, for your partnership with the Oklahoma Policy Institute for many years that, again, predate me. Kudos to Kyle if he ever listens to this.
Kyle
that's still, I think about you every day, Kyle.
Yes.
But to really pivot, because you reach an audience, and all of our partners who have these audiences takes me back to where I started. You know, being an activist and making change, and how we make change requires a level of engagement on the part of most of us. I'm not going to say all of us, because not all of us can do certain things.
Right.
I told a group of folk I met at the Capitol yesterday, it only takes 3 people to start a revolution. They got to be 3 real committed, dedicated folk. But when we
to me,
think about that,
that's the real marriage.
That's the
That's the
marriage.
death till death do us part.
That's
Yes.
absolutely right. So the circle keeps getting bigger, that core of committed folk, and then
Right.
the next circle of folk who want to know and
Right.
could do a little, to
Right.
that other circle, to that big circle of folk who could at least go vote.
Right.
We talk about
Right.
change. At least go vote.
Right.
Better vote now before you don't have that ability to do
Right.
so. So change becomes all of us working in partnership, doing what we can where we are.
And so I want to circle back what you were saying earlier about that legislator where he suggested that in order for people to vote, they need to be able to answer these questions. And I hear what he's saying. We have done some research through OPI and a variety of other places where many people that are registered to vote don't understand the issues,
That's right.
don't understand how it impacts them, don't understand the systems that exist, that more often than not, those systems were created not to benefit everyone. They were made to benefit certain people, and have no clue of how to pivot, how to change. You talked about earlier, how to change those systems. So one of our disruptors, the Crown's Tea, we talk about a variety of topics, from redlining to voter suppression, you name it. And what is a consistent is it's not that folks don't have that the knowledge doesn't exist, they don't understand it.
That's right. And when they don't understand it, they don't do anything.
Exactly.
So they don't go vote.
And so
that's why we're one of the lowest state in the country, 49th, 50th in eligible voter turnout.
Correct.
And that's hard. That's
Correct.
hard to disrupt, but that requires, I have always said it. When we're talking about relationship and trust, I had a conversation with a person last night about get out the vote and what we can do.
Right.
And so there's going to be this webinar on Monday night about political action.
Right.
And we were talking about what can be said there. I said, people don't know what to do.
Right.
So the people who are going to sign in are obviously people who are interested, who want to do something.
Right.
So I said, you know what? Just tell people, if we ask people, just get a list of 10 folk that who don't understand necessarily, who don't typically go vote, that are your 10 folk. And it's your responsibility to at least encourage them, if not, educate them. That would be great. But it's your position, not just to encourage them, but on election day, to make sure everybody on that list of 10 folk went to vote.
Right.
And you think that's hard, but it's really not that hard.
Right.
Most of them going to be folk who live in our houses.
Right. With the understanding that once that day has come and gone, there's still more work to be done.
Still more work to be done.
Because that's just a presidential election. That has nothing to do with the city, the county,
That's
the
right.
state, and all the things that we've talked about, the basic needs, roof over head, clothes on your
That's
back.
right.
So there are so many systems that are created not to support
That's
that.
absolutely right. And the local elections have more direct impact. The school board elections, where the
Exactly.
turnout is like 7%,
Exactly.
sometimes really low.
Exactly.
City councils.
Yes.
The governor's race.
Yes.
Now that the governor in Oklahoma has the power to appoint a whole lot of people
Yes.
who run agencies that provide
Yes.
services to us,
Yes.
who sits in that seat becomes vitally important.
Yes.
So you're right. But if people, if you just kind of get in the habit of
Yes.
voting and learning. But see, we have an obligation, neighborhood associations, all of us, our churches, to begin to educate people. Because I think the more people know, the more they understand, the more they'll do. But we got to meet them where they were.
Agreed.
I tell people, when I used to run for office, it was nothing for me to get on the city bus at 6 a.m. and ride the bus and talk to people about issues.
Right.
Meet them where they are.
Right.
It wasn't,
Right.
when you're running a campaign at 9:00 on a Friday night, you're not gonna knock doors.
No.
You're not gonna you're not gonna make phone calls. So what would we do? Because I was young, they were young. Hell, we go to the club.
Right.
People
Right.
say, you talk to people at issues at the club. Well, you talk to it differently about it.
Yeah, but you still talk about
still talk about
That's
things. So
right.
you meet people where they are.
That's right.
Going to a Sunday school class. I mean,
Right.
you
And see,
just-
what you're I think you were an anthropologist in your previous life, because
Okay.
that
All right.
is anthropology
Okay.
101. 101
We all
is
say
you meet people where
where
they are.
you know, and you just make the connection and you build upon that connection. And sometimes it takes a couple of days and sometimes it might take a couple of months or a couple of years.
That's right.
But if you stop, it'll never happen.
That's
So I
right.
just tell people, until I die, I'm probably going to be an activist on some level or the other because
Understood.
it takes a lifetime
It is.
to make.
Again, I think it's the true marriage.
I love my grandbabies.
That
I
and-
don't
and
want
being
to,
a parent.
I don't want them to
That's the
live
true
in
marriage.
a life. My favorite movie, is Denzel Washington's movie, The Book of Eli.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I love that movie, not because it's a happy thing. It has an ending that's hopeful. But when you look at the way people live, I keep thinking, I don't want my babies to have to live like
Right.
that. I don't want their babies. I don't want anybody to have to forage for
Right.
water
Right.
or be illiterate.
Right.
So,
Right. And-
we got to do stuff to make sure that doesn't happen.
Agreed. And so, circling back, I wanted to make one other point. I have some younger folks or many younger folks in my life, and their belief is we should just shut down the systems. And I said, there was this thing called the height of the pandemic. I'm good. If we never do that again, I'm good.
You're good.
Because
Well,
I've lived in a world where the systems were shut down. No, ma'am.
Well, I have an older friend, and we were laughing because we always talk about doing a podcast, the two of us. It's just our conversation with the guests every now and then, and he lives in another place, and we laugh because he's of the mindset that you do have to just burn it down. And that's we ultimately want to be at the same place, but how we get there is where the tension is. And I mean, family members who watched our discussions always say, ooh, you guys ought to record that because it could get
It's
tense.
passionate.
But yeah,
Yes.
but it's entertaining sometimes because it can be funny.
Yes.
But there are people who think you have to burn it down. There are people who are incrementalists. There are people
Right.
who whatever.
Right.
And I just think there's a space for all of us.
Agreed.
I'm of the mindset it's not either or. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not my
Agreed.
way, your way. It's not black and white.
No.
It's not any of those
Right.
things. And that's how we get stuck.
Agreed.
And nothing happens. So
Agreed.
everybody has to be willing to yield a little, listen a lot, and plan and implement. And if you think it's your way and your way only to get to this
Right.
change, and I work with some friends who do that, who believe that, then you'll never get there.
Agreed.
You'll never get there because you will never get enough people to agree with that your
Agreed.
way
is the only way. Agreed. So I said, I think in the beginning that I wanted to talk about education, but we've been talking
yeah.
about it the whole time.
We have been.
And again, it's not that Oklahoma doesn't have it. In some cases, it's people that don't have access. And in other cases, it's people that have access, but what do I do with this?
Right.
How do I transition this from words to action?
Right.
I need a step-by-step playbook, for lack of a better word. You're calling me to action. I get that I'm supposed to come and vote in November. Then what?
Then what? And we have to, when we talk about meeting people where they are, because I don't expect everybody to show up at a Together Oklahoma convening.
Right.
I don't expect people to sign on to all of our affinity group
Right.
meetings at OK
Right,
Policy where we can talk specifically about issues.
Right.
But if we can that's the core I always describe. And if we can figure out how we take that hub and enlarge and enlarge and enlarge, that's how people run successful campaigns.
Good point.
Those people who put a yard sign up for their candidate of their choice, that's all they do. They're on the outside,
Right.
wheel.
Right.
But they got there because
Right.
somebody on the inside kept filtering.
Right.
So
Right.
we have to figure that out. We have to
Right.
figure that out. And education is critical. But I want to say this because it's not just that broader education about politics and social change and blah, blah, blah. We got to start with trying to educate that kindergarten, that pre-K or at
Right.
school. Oklahoma does a I almost said a bad word, a horrible job at doing that. And it shows up in our workforce. Again, at this study in poverty yesterday. I mean, the higher ed person from the Regents was there, and he gave us these numbers. And we look at people with even just a high school diploma, how much better they do than people who drop out. People with some college do a whole lot better than people with just a high school graduate, people with a college degree. And people say, oh, it doesn't matter. It does matter. The numbers prove it.
Yes.
And I told him straightforward, I said, the reason why Oklahoma doesn't have as many college graduates as we think we should, as we know we need, is because our students who leave high school are not prepared.
Agreed.
They're not prepared. And he agreed. He said, we're going to embargoed now, but we know what ACT scores are. It's just a measure. But when you look at what our kids, the number of kids in third grade who can't read at third grade level. The problem doesn't start when they graduate college or when they get to high school.
It started when they were small.
When they were 2 and 3. And we just don't have systems that believe in that. I'm going to tell you, our system is not that they don't want to do it. They don't, because they don't. Our systems, and that's, people say, and I've always said, systems in government don't bleed, they don't breed, they are us.
Correct.
They are people who make choices and decisions about how things operate.
And I want to say earlier when you said, you almost said a bad word, I laughed because it made me think of a recent debate where two candidates in the presidential election and for the president, and one made a face, and the memes have. And so when you said that, it was like, okay, yeah, I get it.
You got it.
Yes.
So I mean, it's commitment. It's but it's how we value people. That's the human. Back to where we started. We're all human. We all want the same thing. If we don't value that notion as individuals, if I don't have value, if I don't see value in you just because you exist, then I'm going to do some perverse kinds of things.
That's right. I have dehumanized you. Yes. While working as in the library field and even as an anthropologist, reading to your child 20 minutes a day. That's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
And it could be, I remember with my kids, one is 30 and the other is 24, but when they were little, one was a ferocious reader, the other not so much. Oh, you want to read the can of the alcohol, rubbing alcohol? Let's read it.
Read that.
Oh, you want to read about every book in the library about dinosaurs? Let's do it.
That's fine. It doesn't matter.
I don't care. I just need you to read. And then once they were fine with reading, what did you just read?
That's right.
What are you comprehending?
That's right. What do you understand? You know, my favorite book right now that I'm trying to convince my 9-year-old granddaughter to read with me, because I read it with my 29-year-old third-year med student who I'm proud of, The Day My Butt Went Psycho. It's like, what the heck? I love that little book. So she didn't really want to read it. So what I did is I told her the story of the first chapter, because I know this book. And she says, well, Grammy, let's read the second chapter then. I said, no, your mama would kill me because it's time you should be asleep. But we have to find ways. But there's a generation. There's a generation of parents now that don't understand that value.
Correct.
And so it's been difficult.
Correct.
We have work to do.
Correct.
And I will never give up on a generation, but sometimes we got to figure out how to skip over and go directly to those now that we can influence and change.
Agreed.
And I'm not just being mean, but we don't give up. That's not giving up. That's refocusing on that generation that we can have some impact on. So,
and for me personally and professionally, that 20 minutes a day, even if it's with someone older,
that's right.
A kid, a seasoned adult, anyone, you are creating a space for broadening their language, their reading and understanding, and you are inviting them to critically think.
That's right.
Which is a huge part
That's absolutely
of
right.
disrupting systems.
And a huge part of understanding power
Yes.
and power dynamics.
Yes.
It's just So yes, we have a challenge, and people say, well, what can I do?
Read
Well,
to
maybe
your family.
that's it. Maybe that's it. This church group that's trying to figure out what can I do. Well, maybe just go to the neighborhood school and say, hey, can we have some moments with students, or just give our names and numbers to teachers, vet us through the process. We'll come into the building. They can, people are concerned about who's with their kids nowadays, rightfully so. Rightfully so, but there are ways we can make sure that we have, again, that's the trust factor. But there are ways don't trust anybody and everybody, but there are ways to vet individuals. Go with them, parent. If you're that parent that's that concerned, take them then. If you don't want to read to them, just go play on your phone for 20 minutes as somebody in the same room is reading to your child. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I just know they're there. We just got to figure it out and do them.
I know another example, in addition to reading every 20 minutes a day with a child, an adult, it doesn't matter, is, and it's not very often that it happens, but it does happen when you have cash. So this is in the math arena. When you have cash and you're making a purchase, let's say your bill is $32.22 and you give $40. You look at your child and you ask them, how much am I going to get back?
How much am I going to get back? If you can figure it out, give me the answer. Maybe I'll give some to you.
Yes.
I'm not above bribing kids. People say you shouldn't bribe kids. Kids need to earn money.
Right.
And I don't mind paying you to do your job, which is to learn stuff. That's your job right now.
Right.
know? So,
and I know there is a system that is working towards removing that type of currency where we are all debit, credit. There is no
on the card.
exchange.
You better learn how to count your money.
That part.
I tell my
That
grandbabies, you better learn how to count your money because you don't want people to cheat you.
Right. Because that's a big part of this podcast, is not only talking about stuff, but giving people some real basic simple
tools.
stuff to do.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's something you can do every day. Instead of looking at your phone, going through all the reels for 20 minutes, sit and talk and read with your kids.
Just have a conversation.
Yeah.
So, lessons learned for all of us. And anybody who listens to this podcast, I think they could extract a whole lot of very simple things that they could do every day to make a difference. And then join somebody else. Oklahoma Policy Institute always stands ready to embrace and engage with those people who want to do more but don't know how. People who want to do more and they have ideas as to how. It doesn't matter. Just come join this effort as we try to build our Together Oklahoma communities. And we do use that word.
Yes.
And communities are like-minded people who want to make a difference. As we build those communities around the state, join us, and we work on local issues. We can work with you on local issues. You can work with us on state issues, help us identify those state issues. The door is open because we are all in this together.
Agreed. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your laughter. I'm still thinking about you being a stand-up comedian.
Oh, girl, I was good. Once we end, I'll tell you a couple of my still favorite jokes. And it's all about delivery, right?
True.
People will laugh at stuff that's not really funny if you kind of deliver it in a funny way.
Fair.
And by the time I was 12, I had it perfected. I was ready. Johnny Carson at night was my role model. So I could stand up and entertain my family. Anyway, one of these days you'll ask me to MC something and I can kind of use those old skills.
Yes.
And some of those old jokes, just tell me the audience, because some of the jokes are not for every audience.
Good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.